Okay, should we just start from, don't worry if you haven't done it all, it's fine, it's not a test, but hopefully it's just got you thinking a little bit around, you know, when you look at the cognitive challenges related to activities of daily living, just functioning, all of us, you know, getting up, what do we do? It's amazing what this brain makes us do every day and what we have to cope with. So personal care. Anyone at the top of the table?
They may end up ignoring their personal care.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if they're not ignoring, they may not use suitable, equipment or.
Correct.
What you
Yeah, just like I was doing. Great example.
And,
Yeah.
They may end up even in terms of appearance, you know, when they're putting the clothes on or deciding
Correct.
on what clothes and they need.
Correct.
Putting their clothes
Yeah.
outside.
Inside out.
Inside out.
Yeah.
This way.
Yeah. So lots of risk in self-neglect with personal care areas. Certainly as well, because medication kind of comes under that personal care element. And obviously if people are on medications for their depression, on their management of epilepsy, etc., if they don't get those triggers, strategies in that routine, that, you know, part of the sequence is they've got to take their tablets with their cup of tea in the morning. If that isn't homed in, then they're at risk. Okay, what about halfway down the table, managing the home?
Security,
Mm-hmm. Risks.
phone bills.
Mm-hmm.
You might have problems with orientation, remembering where things are.
Yeah. That's a huge one that people underestimate actually. They've had their kitchen set up like that for the whole years that they've lived in their house. Suddenly they walk into it and they can't remember where the cutlery is. They can't remember where the tea bags are kept. So you have to go through that process. And that's where you're untapping memory. That's where you're really bringing back in the routine again, because if it's a long-term memory with brain injury, it's likely that that is so bedded in and so part of that automatic process that there isn't going to be an issue. It will be there. It's just how you get to it and how do you trigger that again. That's why people do freak out when I say to them about driving, and then solicitors say to me, what are you thinking about? Case managers are going, why would you put them back on the road? But it's because essentially their long-term memory and their awareness of those tasks is present, and as obviously it's heavily risk assessed, and they go to specialist driving centres to go and get properly assessed on off-road and do the cognitive assessments, but a lot of the time they pass. Might scare the living daylights out of you that they're back on the road, but ultimately they get such a sense of their role back and their ability and their independence that it's certainly an area that I would look at with them. Managing finances and correspondence. You've already said if you don't pay bills, their electricity gets cut off. You know, can't remember spending the money, that's a great one. Then it's suddenly somebody's been in my house and stolen it. Yeah, puts everybody at risk. You know, you suddenly are getting shouted at and told that you're actually the ones that have been taking my money. I haven't spent anything. So we do a lot of budget work. I do lots of budget plans and things like that with people, and how to manage, you know, the ins and the outs, and having a system set up, but also work with neuropsychologists on their contract as well. Losing letters, vulnerable and exploited. A lot of people get very exploited with when they are found out with brain injury. The neighbours suddenly very friendly and popping in to help with milk and everything else, and actually you find out that other things are going on as well, so just be aware. Impact on personal relationships and children.
There can be a lot of sort of emotional challenges in it, just anger, frustration.
Yeah.
So obviously they won't be able to keep up the relationship as they used to before. So that's a breakdown of relationships. That would be the risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, can't remember conversations, can't remember personal history. I mean, you're suddenly with somebody that you shared a lifetime with and they can't remember it, and it's heartbreaking. But also just general things about their role. You know, if they were a parent before and suddenly they can't look after that person and the child is actually looking after them, how do they understand that? How do they pick that up? But the other one is also about, you know, if they're living in a house, a very busy, active house, it's noise levels. It's being actually overwhelmed by their environment, because a lot of the time we have to find breakout spaces within their home that they can go and just have time out and find silence and reboot, readjust their heads. Social integration.
They generally wouldn't have the general sort of knowledge of social etiquettes and things like that.
Correct.
So the risk would be of isolation or losing sort of social skills altogether.
Correct.
So that would be the main thing. Or again, like being overwhelmed and overstimulated
Yeah.
in a social.
Yeah. So then they develop anxiety and they develop those agoraphobia, and they become very isolated because they won't go out of the house because they're very worried about it. Memory, can't remember people's names. It's a key one. A lot of people actually just are really troubled about going back out into their social circles because they don't want to embarrass people or upset people because they can't actually remember their names. I worked with a guy on a huge project. He could not remember faces and names, and he was actually, going into situations where he had to be able to converse, and it was part of his role. And so we set up his iPad, and he had pictures of every single person, and he would literally do a quick sort of scan of the room before he went in, and then run to the loo and do a very quick, that person's here, that person's here, that person's here, and he would remember their names and walk around with them on his iPad so he could remember. So he had a strategy. He recognised it was a problem. He didn't say, I don't have that problem. He basically took on the strategy, and it worked brilliantly. To the point where he was able to learn to say, I'm so sorry I've forgotten your name, please don't take it personally, and worked out and developed his own language to cope with it as well. Okay, and employment we touched upon. Brilliant. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to whip through problems encountered. So problem solving, there are loads of ways to do this, okay, but sort of looking at the key problems for a lot of people that have got neurological, the ones that are most common that come up. Everybody's got problems. We all have problems. We all are faced with problems every day and decisions that we have to do and make a plan, etc. So finding places is a key one. Scheduling appointments, remembering to do the tasks, cooking, looking after themselves. So all the stuff that we've been talking about. But the additional problems are they suddenly got this whole health change. And a lot of the diaries, I think you were saying about your client, her sister has suddenly had to take on this role of being basically her finance organizer, of organising all her appointments, of taking all that on board because the person can't, and thank God she's got that sister to do it, because who else would do it? And certainly this is where it comes down into the capacity element, and if that person's got capacity to take that on. So those are kind of the problems. So I'm just going to do this really quickly because of the time, as usual, but essentially there's kind of like a 6-step plan to solving the problems, all right, that we use. So I'm going to talk about my problem this morning. Is I woke up and my problem wasn't a big problem because I'd already planned it and organised it the night before, but I woke up and it was, how am I going to get to here today? Because I don't know it. I've never been on this route before, and I'm not sure of the directions, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take. So essentially, what's that? What you're doing is, what is the problem? So my problem is, how am I going to get here today? So that's identifying what the problem is. And what do I need to do? So I need to work out the ways to do that. So how are the different ways I could do it? Well, I can drive, I can catch public transport, or I can get a cab. All right, so those probably would be my 3 ideas. So those are the things. From that, what are the pros and cons on each of those options? So in my head, I'm going, okay, well, it's time. Big thing for me is I've got to get here on time. That's how long it is. I'm going to Google, I'm going to research, I'm going to organise myself, I'm going to find out how long it takes in a train, how long it's going to take in the taxi, and obviously driving is the same. What are the pros and cons? So if I get a taxi, it's going to cost a lot of money. If I go in the car, I'm basically going to be getting quite anxious and frustrated if the traffic is slow and I can't get there, whereas at least in a taxi I could read through everything and concentrate. Or I could go on public transport, but again, it's a bit not sure where I'm going, and I've got to concentrate the whole journey because I've got to get off and get on and go to places, and I'm going to have enough money for ticket, blah, blah, blah. So that's your problem solving. We're doing it all the time. So the key things for somebody who's got a brain injury, who might not have those skills, is you've got to do it in a very planned and organised way, and you've got to do it out loud. We do it all in our heads all the time. We make decisions all the time. We get to a place and it's like, oh, I can't turn left here, what do I do? Or, wow, it's really cold in the car, what do I do? I turn the heating up. Or, what do I do with that? That's a problem. I need to, we know we have the resources to do that. A lot of the time, our neurologically impaired, cognitively impaired clients can't judge, can't work it out. And certainly as they get more and more tired, it's going to get harder and harder, and that's when you're going to get that huge bang, explosive behaviour, anger or withdrawal. Right, that's it, I'm going, slam the door, and off they go, lock themselves in their bedroom. So you always make a detailed plan, you always sit down and say, okay, let's plan the day, let's look at what we're doing, how are we going to get through this, how are we going to work through this. So that's an absolute stop tour of problem solving. Ooh. What happened there? Right, you have 1 minute. Please look at the board, at the screen. The lady's name is Sally Ward. Okay. Memory. The ability to retain knowledge of previous, current thoughts, to make impressions, and of events, okay? So there are 3 kind of categories that you can put it in. Immediate memory, it lasts for literally a few seconds. So if you think, can you think of an immediate memory that you have and then it disappears? Quite difficult. I was thinking there going, oh, you remember everything, but you don't. Pinprick. Pain. It's usually sensory. So essentially, if you burn your hand, that's what you take. You might have a longer memory of the vision. You can see it and it hurts, but actually when you prick your hand or anything, it's an immediate memory. Somebody might say to you on the phone, oh, just drop this number down. You think, I've got a pen or a paper. Okay, so if you, luckily, I can't remember that number when it's said to you over the phone, brilliant. I can remember email addresses and words because my favourite thing is words. I hate numbers. I think I've got a number dyslexia actually. I just have such a problem with remembering them. So essentially, that's your immediate. It's within a few minutes and then it's gone. Poof, you'll never remember it again. So a lot of clients have an immediate memory, okay? What their difficulty is with short-term memory. So your classic is 30 minutes or more. So nurse comes up to the patient in the bed, right, come on, Mr. Smith, you need to get up, go to the bathroom, you need to have a wash and have a dress, and then I'll come back with a nice cup of tea for you. Off she goes. 30 minutes later comes back. Mr. Smith, why aren't you up? What? You haven't been to see me? Yep, I have been to see you. Doesn't remember anything. So that's a really, really hard one for our very newly acute brain injury people. It's quite present, it's quite obvious, and they are really struggling to hold on to anything like that. The long-term memory is often what we do get back because it's been laid down for years and years and years, and it's an automatic. So when I think about automatic process, okay, it's the stuff that you've learned from day one, like your name, okay? So you won't forget your name. You've always been called your name. You'll always remember it. It's very rare that someone forgets their name. If they do, it's a really major head injury because they've really blotted out a huge area of their brain. So basically 10 years back or more, okay? Remember our filing systems, remember the way that the memory works. It's like a post office, okay? The information goes in and off it goes filing, you know, everywhere to the different elements that holds on and retains, etc. Everybody learns very differently memory-wise, okay? So the key ones are, you've got the episodic, which is personal events, so birthdays, your name, your family members, can be autobiographical. So it can be, I remember what school I went to, I remember what A-levels I took, even though it's years and years and years ago, it was such present memory, it was so laid down at that point, so you don't forget. Semantic is general knowledge. That's when, you know, the mini mental test that a lot of people get tested when they're having, you know, memory problems, etc. So, who's the President of the United States of America? They always ask that. Yeah, it's a hard one to forget. But you see, you'll ask, who's the Prime Minister? I still get a few David Camerons, okay? And that's because essentially what they're not remembering is, okay, there has been a change, and it might be a year, but ultimately, for some, that is long enough for them not to have remembered it, because if they had their brain injury at that time, they won't remember all that change and all those significant events that happened at that time that trigger, actually, there was a change. Procedural memory, how to carry out a task or skill that we've learned and practiced. Procedural memory is essential with neurorehab, okay? That's what we've been talking about, repetition, repetition. Repeat it the same way. If you don't repeat it the same way, so it's really difficult. If every single one of you went into somebody's house, one individual who had the brain injury, you would all do it differently. It's human nature. You know, you would all approach it differently. You would all manage that person differently. You'd all speak to that person differently. What we're trying to do is be consistent. We are trying really hard in neurorehabilitation to make sure that everybody does it uniformed. Everybody does it the same way. And the way we try and get everybody on board is saying, well, if you do it that way, you're letting that person down at having the best opportunity and the best chance of getting a good recovery. So that's why procedural memory, certainly in rehabilitation, that's what we're trying to trigger into again, okay? And certainly procedural memory would be something like driving. It's so automatic, you know, how many of us drove today and don't even remember the route because it's something that you do every day, day in, day out. That's what procedural memory is. Verbal and auditory memory and language. That's a really key one. Obviously, lots of people are either more attuned to words and hearing things and music. I don't know. Some people might hear a piece of music and be taken straight back to where they heard that music the first time, and it might trigger an immediate memory. There's some extraordinary research and some evidence on what happens in memory. Certainly on that Andrew Marf program again, there was a woman who couldn't speak, and actually she could hear words, she understood words, but actually the only way she could communicate back was through singing. She'd sing. But she could sing perfectly with all the words and all the tune, but when you asked her to speak, she couldn't. And her language and the music was really the thing. And then again, for some people, if their first language is not English and they're doing their rehab in English and they're working in English, sometimes their first language is the one that comes back, and that they can talk and communicate in their first language, but they can't in the English. And then visual memory, remembering pictures and visual information. That's my strength, I know personally. If I want to remember things, I need to look at pictures, I need to see it. It's definitely the way that I learn. Okay. I don't think that was much time to leave. Okay, what I'm going to do is, all of you get your mobile, have you all got a mobile phone? Yeah. I'm turning your phones on now. Turn your phone on, okay. And on that phone, tell me what you use on your phone, apps-wise, to help with your memory. Notes, yeah. Calendar, yeah. Alarm, yeah, absolutely. Google Maps, absolutely. Memos, yeah. People have those post-it notes. Pardon? Diary. Pictures, big one. Photos. I'm a photo fiend.
Contacts as well.
Contacts, recording all your contacts, absolutely. Thank God for smartphones. Okay, that's all I can say, because years ago these did not exist. Okay, everybody had paper diaries. Everybody walked around with paper diaries. I mean, the most amazing thing for rehabilitation these days is this. And one of the things that certainly when I go and see patients, that's the first thing I'm looking at when I do rehabilitation, and using that tool. It's very difficult for people that don't use it. So I've still got, you know, my 70-year-olds with their brick who are like, I'm not going to use that. So that's fine. You've got to work with whatever they use and what is meaningful to them. It's very difficult if they've always used a diary with a calendar on the wall that this, you know, this sort of young, keen therapist comes in and goes, right, well, I've got the latest digital technology, and you know, you're asking them to learn something that is so foreign to them, and they're already struggling to learn stuff, and it's very, very difficult. But for most people, this is standard piece of equipment. And also, I think what is so good as well is that this is very acceptable in the norm. Every single person has got one. It's not a Tobii system. It isn't a great big alphabetical board that people have to use. It is something that certainly for our younger clients and our teenage boys that have been in their road traffic accidents, they are very happy to have this stuff set up with alarms massively triggering them to look at their phone, bring their attention back. Certainly for me, for attention, is I set alarms to stop people working because they get too fixed and rigid on what they're doing and they don't stop. And then basically 2 hours later, they're cognitively fatigued and they can't do anything for 2 days. So I use alarms very regularly to stop people working and everything. Okay. Okay, we're coming back to this exercise. So, who can remember what was on that board, starting at the back?
The picture of a chess.
Chessboard, yeah.
Shaking hand, I think, down.
Yeah. Somebody else? An egg, yeah.
There was a rabbit or a hare.
A rabbit or a
there was a number.
What was the number?
0208 994. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
There was a woman with the
Hold on a minute. Huh?
There was
Did you hear that? Who don't say anything. Who wrote, anybody remember the name? Okay. There was a rabbit. Anything else?
There was like the Ludo.
Chess. It was chess.
And there was also handshake as well. wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
dice.
dice. The dice.
The dice,
Yes.
5 and 7. Yeah. 5 and 2.
Like one, I think.
5 and 2.
7, 5 and 2.
213 pounds.
Well done. Well done.
Oh, yeah.
So look, okay, well done. You've got them all. Okay, you've got them all. All right, so that exercise shows me a bit about what people remember, how they remember, okay? So what did you say about Sally Ward?
She's holding the board.
Ta-da! Okay, association. So we teach a lot of association. It's quite a fun exercise to do with people if they've got real problems with names, and it's basically what do they look like? And then we just let them drop their filter and say what they look like, but actually it helps them. But Sally Ward with the board, exactly. So it's just how do you recall that and everything. The other side of this is, so chunking. Has people heard about chunking? How you remember? Okay, so is that how you remembered that number?
Yeah, 028 is easy. 332 and 1984.
Yeah, exactly. So brilliant. So a lot of this is, and actually a lot of this stuff that we do with memory is general brain training, okay? It's how we should be trying to stretch our brains and trying to remember. And you know, you do it with your kids at parties. Do you remember the game that you used to have a tray and you used to put everything on it and put a cover on it? You know, get them to look at it, put a cover on it, take it away, then you take one thing away and then bring it back and go, what's missing? You know, those kind of things. So we do that a lot with clients, actually. We do try and set these things up without belittling them, but we say, okay, we're going to do some memory games now and some strategies. And that's the kind of thing that we would do. How did you remember, you were like, no, you didn't want to start the exercise, but then you came up right at the end and you were the one that said the money. How do you, is that your motivator? You look at the numbers. How did you remember that? Is it just that was the first thing that you remembered?
Something nice memory. 2 and 13.
Yeah. Yeah.
My granddaughter's birthday.
There you go. Yeah, association. So I always look, when I look at numbers, because I'm so rubbish at remembering numbers, I look at numbers in a very different way from probably other people. And what I look at is patterns and how that, so for me, 213, I look at it as it's 1, 2, 3. So I actually, in my eyes, I've taken a photograph of it and I remember the placement of the numbers rather than actually remembering what if you understand what I'm saying, is where the numbers are. So I've taken a snapshot of that and gone, it's 1, 2, 3. And yeah, chunking. Chunking is a big area that we work with memory. Ooh, that's cool. Write the information down. You don't write to your colleague and went, don't write it down. I didn't say that. I didn't say don't write it down.
I write it down in order to remember. Even when I study, I have to write down.
Yeah. Everyone learns, everyone remembers in a different way. You're either a theorist, lots of people like to read, and it goes in and it sits there and that's how they use it and that's how they bring it back. I'm a pragmatist. I have to roll up my sleeves and get involved and do it. If it's practical and I do it, I will remember it. That's how my brain remembers things. I have to be actually practically doing it. Other people will look at pictures. You know, pictures. That's what they do. That's how they formulate it. I always, one of the assessments that I do with clients actually is I go and buy a classic piece of IKEA flat pack and I hand it to them and go, do it. And it is absolutely the best cognitive process that you can work out. Because what do? How do they sequence? Do they look at the picture? Do they follow the instructions? Or do they do what I do, which is like, nah, I can do this. And then you just lay it all out and then you sort of go, okay, well that goes, you know, construct it. But a lot of people have to sit down and, you know, you can see with the TV, the new TV arrives and the whole like remote control, it's got 50 buttons on it. I know about 5 of my buttons on my phone because I've never sat down with the manual and gone, right, I need to read this from the start to the finish. Just don't do it. So, you know, the way people learn and the way people do it. So obviously writing down is key for everybody, I think. In the beginning, certainly when you can't rely on your memory, you do it. Or, another good thing to do, record it. That's the other thing. iPhones are brilliant. If they don't mind listening to their voice, record it verbally. A lot of people do that. There's so many apps now that you can use that actually take that on board. Associate information, we talked about that a lot. Sally Ward and her board. Chunking, we've talked about. Repetition. All the time. That's all I can say with memory. If you really want to make it work, you have to keep going over and over and over it. And they prove that with school children, you know, how they learn their times tables. Absolutely, repetition, all the time, every day. They get it, it goes in, and then it just fixes. And then you're using it. The problem that we have these days is you might go and learn something, like today. You've had me talking at you the whole time, you've had all this information given to you. Unless you're going to go and put it into practice and use it, are you going to remember it? It's very difficult. I won't take offence. But you know, it's really difficult because unless you are then taking it practically and putting it into play, it's very difficult for us to remember. Okay.
Repetition. Does it need to be purposeful, like the person knows what's the purpose of that exercise?
Yes.
They can do it even without knowing that why they are doing that exercise.
You've got to, it's got to be purposeful. So usually with me for repetition and memory, I will try and use the task that they've identified, okay? So if it's because they want to make a cup of tea for their child every day, like they used to, what you have to do is break down that activity and you have to turn around to them and say, okay, which bits do we need to practice? So every time I go into their kitchen, I'm like, right, stand in the middle of the kitchen, tell me where your cutlery drawer is. Where's your plate? Where's your tea bag kept? Where's the fridge? Right, what's the first thing that you do? I fill up the kettle. Right, okay, and then you do that. So we plan it before they've even moved or done the functional part, because once they get involved in the activity, they open the door and they go, oh, I didn't know I had that, look at that. Oh, maybe actually, you know what, I might make hot chocolate. And then you can say, no, hang on a minute, what did we say we were going to make? So when I talk about repetition, it doesn't just have to be rote learning and writing. It doesn't have to be that. You can do it in activity. And the routine of getting dressed in the morning, or the routine of doing their grooming, you know, we all have a routine in the morning in where we start with our grooming. You know, whether you do your hair first, your teeth, your makeup, whatever, shave, whatever, you have that routine. Practice that routine. Remind yourself where the equipment is to do that routine. That's the repetition that I'm talking about. And then you do it every day. And then it starts becoming automatic, which is what happened to that girl that I was talking about that had her own flat. She now doesn't need to write on her calendar, do the laundry, clean my bedroom, blah, blah, blah. She does it automatically. She wakes up, she looks in her laundry basket, I need to, just like we all do. Now she's doing it automatically, but she had to practice and practice and practice and practice and check her schedule. Okay. Things that make your memory worse very quickly. Fatigue, obvious, we've talked a lot about it. Hungry. Forget how much you need to put the fuel in the engine, okay? And if they're not eating properly. So often what I'll do before a wash and dress session is I will get them to have a cup of tea and a biscuit or a banana before they start going. They have their breakfast sometimes before they do their washing and dressing, because you need a lot of energy to do washing and dressing. People laugh at me when I say, sometimes you're going to do that and feel like you've just done a whole routine at the gym. But actually, when you think next time you do your routine in the morning and you break down every single step, be conscious, be present, work out what you're doing, it takes a lot of processes to get yourself ready in the morning. And so that's why, please try and get them to eat before they have anything, before they do anything. Being intoxicated, obviously, does not help. When the information that you need is complex, again, break it down, make it simple. A lot of what I do with OT is I get recipes, I get instruction manuals, and I have to put it down into simplistic terms and put it onto one page. Mood and emotions. If you're feeling stressed, anxious, what Emma was talking about earlier, you know, when you're in a heightened situation, you're not going to hear anything. If you are screaming mad and angry, the last thing you're going to be able to do is start remembering stuff that you've been told. Okay, so de-escalate. And that happens a lot in low mood as well. Okay, attention we've talked about. I think I'm going to fly through this. But some strategies, again, very, very simple. Apparently, so I'm worrying because everyone's like, I can see flagging, I need a coffee break. But 35 minutes is your absolute maximum of sustaining really good attention, okay? So they've proven this with research on students in lecture halls and theatres. But what I try and do is when I talk to people about fatigue management, there's physical fatigue and there's cognitive fatigue. With your concentration when you're doing computer work, there's a couple of things that might happen with your attention, okay? You get so fixed and rigid on what you're doing that you've lost all awareness of everything else. We all do it. We get there and we just go, oh, we'll just answer one or two, and then I've got to get out the door, so that's my alarm. But you keep going, oh, I'll just do one more. Oh God, no, I need to check that and I need to do that. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, I've lost an entire 45 minutes just answering 3 emails. You get very fixed in it. So there's that side of the attention where it becomes very fixed and actually it becomes completely cognitively draining, and they come away from it feeling mentally exhausted and you can't take any more information in. So some of my clients say, God, I've been out in the garden all day having the most wonderful time. I've just literally come in, had a cup of tea, sat down just to do a couple of phone calls, and it's the phone calls that have drained me, that have absolutely exhausted me, and it's because you're using different parts of your brain. You could be very fit. Lots of people that have ski accidents or bike accidents or horse riding accidents, they're physically bounce back really quickly and they can do all of that. It's actually the planning, organising, getting there, doing the cognitive stuff. That's what wears them out. So we have to scale that and manage that. So that's why that take breaks, even if they look like they're performing okay and there are no mistakes being made, take a break. Get up. Even just walk outside, come back in, go make a coffee, go to the loo, come back and start again. And we do a lot of that when it's work return or students, about how to make those breaks. Key and obvious structure routine. For people that are disorientated, that are coming out through their brain injury and everything, get the routine in. Get them to know and feel control of what their day is looking like. Otherwise it's endless, especially if they've got memory problems. They can't remember who's coming. They can't remember who they're seeing. They can't remember the appointments they've got. They can't remember that they've got physio exercises to do. Get that whiteboard up, get their diary set, get the phone triggered alarms, do all of that, okay? And get them referring so that you can sit down in the morning and one of the first things that you do is get your diary out. Okay, what's on the diary plan today? Where are we going? What are we doing? Get them to take control and feed it back to you. Okay. Errorless learning. Anybody know what this is, this term? No, okay. As part of the neuroplasticity, okay, errorless learning is essential. If you start doing things and are making mistakes while you're doing it, what do you think the brain's going to learn? The wrong way to do it, the wrong way. And then you're going to have to unpick that and teach them again to do it a more effective and a more efficient way, and a way that they're going to understand and have insight into what's going on. So when you are teaching people, this is why the therapists get involved, assess, devise a way that is appropriate to them with their problems, appropriate to them with their cognitive challenges, etc., etc. And then you set up a program and we hand it over to you guys. And this is what I'm saying about errorless learning. So the way in which it happens, I was going to do a task, but we haven't got time. But essentially, you give the commands in a verbal or written way. So you say, right, what we're going to do is first do this, first do that, second do that, third do that. Or you give them a list of instructions and you say, we're going to do that first, then that and that, and I'm going to leave that there for you to refer to, okay? If you're stuck, ask me. If you're not sure how you're doing it and you are stuck and you can't remember, then ask me. But are you okay if I step in and I help you at that point? And then basically you let them get on with it. But at any point that you see that they are starting to make a mistake or they're doing it the wrong way, you actually say, can I just stop you right there? Can we go back to the instructions? Or can you remember what I said about X, Y, Z? That's errorless learning. Don't let them make the mistakes, because they'll start repeating that process rather than the process that is the right way. The hardest thing in my job is when I get a referral for somebody who is 4 years post-injury. They've done the most incredible job of setting up their way of doing things and their ability and their management of doing things. And they've done it the hardest ways possible, and they're compromising themselves and putting themselves at risk. And then I come in and I've got to hold the mirror up and go, actually, you're really dysfunctional, you can't do this, and it's actually showing glaring, obvious problems. We've got to change it and do it another way. They don't like it, makes them feel very depressed, because they feel like I'm back out there and I'm coping, and I'm back to my role and I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And actually what you're saying is you're going to come up against loads of problems because the way that you've been doing it is not the most efficient, effective, and optimizing your skills. So that's errorless learning. If that ever comes up, that's what that's about. But you need to make sure you ask the therapist or whoever's working with you to tell you the best way to do that task. Cognitive rehab. Coffee time, fresh air time.